Good morning. I'm Barry Bryson, and I want to thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. As you can see, we are once again in the Family Bible Class studios because there's a little hubbub going on around the building, which is a wonderful thing. You know, folks are here in the building, activities are being planned and conducted, and this summer, you know, we've got the youth group going, and we've got children's classes and activities, VBS being planned. So it's such a blessing to have to vacate the 5 Good Minute studios for a little while. And so for the next few sessions, we're going to be here in the Family Bible Class studios, otherwise known as the auditorium or the sanctuary, depending upon how you were raised. Anyway, thank you for joining me. We are continuing our study of the minor prophets by beginning a study of the book of Habakkuk, which is just a wonderful, wonderful book. I hope you've loved this study. I say this about every one of these minor prophets. Every one of them, it's like for a reader, it's almost like spice. You know, if you compare reading to eating, it's like spicy food because there's so much in these small packages. And Habakkuk is in itself a singularity. It's not like any other book in the Bible. This is a conversation with God. And then an oracle following the conversation with God. Habakkuk asks a question, gets an immediate answer. Asks a second follow-up question, sort of in protest, and gets a second answer, and then makes a realization and lets us know what his conclusions are. Of course, Habakkuk ends with that wonderful passage, if there be no fig on the vine, you know, if there's no fruit on the vine, if the olive tree should fail, if the field should produce no food, if the flock should be cut off, I'm going to hope in God. He's going to make my feet like hinds' feet on high places. I'm going to have faith in God, even though I'm not going to experience the outcome that I hoped for or that I wanted when I went to talk to God. It's a unique book, and it's a wonderful book, and it's so current when you read it. It's the way we wish things were all the time when we talk to God and had immediate answers from him. And yet it reminds us that we don't know what's best for ourselves, and that what God knows to be best is usually not the thing that we would like to have to endure. And are we going to make peace with that? Because he does. And I think he's an important figure, very important figure. I don't think Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would be the men that they are without the prophecy of Habakkuk. I mean, they maybe, but I think he has to have been a formative influence on them. They must have known this work because they all four echo what we're going to learn in the book of Habakkuk as they have their dealings with the Babylonians. This is a book about Babylonian captivity. It just is. And most of the minor prophets are about captivity or captivity and the returnees from captivity. And this is a book about Babylonian captivity. It's clearly written after the northern kingdom has fallen and after the Assyrians have fallen to the Babylonians, but before Babylonian captivity is going to occur. It may have been written during the time of Hezekiah. The prophet Micah prophesied during the time of Hezekiah, and there were plenty of sins to talk about, even though Israel had a good king. Social injustice, immorality, hypocrisy in their religion. There were just so many things to talk about during the good times, during the time of the good king Hezekiah. But we do remember that the longest serving king of Judah, of God's people, was Hezekiah's son Manasseh, who was the worst king they had. Chronicle says so, and King says so, and who at the end of his life repented. It's a beautiful story, really, the repentance. But he so destroyed that nation and wrecked it. And so there was idolatry added, and every possible form of idolatry added during the time of Manasseh. And so it could have been written during that time. But it's during a time when God's people are so bad that the prophet says to God, how long are you going to put up with this? Why aren't you doing something about this? Which is the original question that prompts the writing of the book. Habakkuk. It's a strange name. No one knows really what it means. It likely has an Assyrian background, comes from Akkadian, which is a Semitic language and related to Hebrew, but it's not a Hebrew name. It doesn't sound like a Hebrew name. I mean, casual readers of the Bible see that it doesn't have that Hebrew sound of having an IAH or a EL or an IM ending. It just doesn't. And so no one knows what it means. It could be connected to harvest time, if it comes from an Akkadian word. It is a dialogue and then a realization. And so he begins the book in the first few verses of chapter 1 saying, how long are you going to put up with this, God? And then God's going to answer, beginning in verse 5, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to haul your people into captivity by the Babylonians. The Babylonians are going to accomplish my will. That's not what he wanted to hear. And so he asked God a second time, how can you do this? They're worse than we are. And God is going to say, well, I'm going to deal with them too. But this is going to happen. And then he makes his realization. And the great realization is Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 13, that God goes forth for the salvation of his people. That this is not just punishment. It's not even primarily punishment. It is curative. It is neither punitive nor palliative. It is curative. God is going to rid us of our idolatry through Babylonian captivity. And although the experience of being destroyed and carried off was traumatic in itself, not nearly so bad as what the northern kingdom experienced at the hand of the brutal Assyrians, but it was bad. If you don't think it's bad, read Psalm 137. Their experience as a people in Babylon and the empire during Babylonian captivity was pivotal in bringing about the fullness of time, in bringing about the ripeness of the age for the Messiah to be born. Okay, well, we'll talk more about the prophet, and we'll get into the text next time that we're together. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.